So today we're going to be covering the original Helios 44-2 and comparing it to what you might know as the Helios 44 to determine which one is better or worse and which one might be better for your particular shooting needs. So even if you're extremely new to photography or videography, I'm sure you have most definitely heard of the Helios 44-2. It is an extremely popular and affordable option that provides very unique characteristics and looks and that wonderful swirly bokeh that everyone loves. Most recently and notably, this lens has been used in films like Batman, and then also in Dune Part 2, they use the MK2 series of lenses, and so that's most notably seen in the garden scene with the Emperor, but you might not be as familiar with the Biotar 50mm 8.2. So what's the difference between these two lenses? Well, it depends on the year and model you get. After World War II, the Soviet Union took a lot of the technology from Germany when they split the country and started producing those things in the Soviet Union. Most notably camera-wise, that would have been the Leica, Hasselblad, as well as the Zeiss lineup. So when it comes to the Biotar 58mm f2, that translated into what we now know as the Helios 44-2. So I put together a few scenes and I'm going to compare these lenses side by side, shooting the exact same scenario, so you can see the differences, if any, and decide what is better for you. I will preface this by saying with any vintage lenses, your results can vary dramatically. It depends on the year the lens was made, what version you have, what factory the lens was made in, how the lens was taken care of over the years. The lens coatings, all of those make a big difference between the sharpness of the lens, the color of the lens. If the lens elements shift over time, it can throw off the focusing mechanism of that lens as well. Especially since they're different lenses to begin with, there's a lot of variables that can be factored into this. I have the Biotar 58mm f2. This is the Exacta mount, so this is not the M42 version, but it is a little bit later version. And then I have the Helios 44-2 here. This is from the first factory that started producing the Helios 44. There was eventually 3 different factories that produced the lens. The later 2 is where the quality and standards kind of tended to drop off, so that's something to consider if you're looking at the Helios 44. I have noticed with the Biotar 58 f2, it is a little harder for me to focus. It seems out of focus at infinity sometimes, but then other times it seems to focus perfectly fine. So maybe I'm just struggling in general, or maybe there is a little bit something off. Definitely needs to be CLA. The grease is making it kind of stiff in certain parts and it's just not smooth. So first up, I set up the scene in the living room, just sitting on the chair, good coffee book. I believe this is the New York edition of Drift Coffee Magazine. If you're a coffee fan, you got to check out Drift Magazine. So I did pretty much a standard comparison with 3 different setups, switching back and forth between the 2 lenses to get the exact same shot with the exact same lighting setup. So we did a wide establishing shot of the room, then we did a mid shot just focusing in on the actual book that I'm reading, and then finally a tighter shot of just my face, close-up detailed look at that sharpness. Now I did shoot all of this wide open at f2. As far as NDs go, I think I just had 1 stop of ND. Now all the purists and traditional people are going to be like, why would you shoot this wide open at f2? And I would say, I'm sorry, but that's just what everybody wants to see. Now, if you're curious how I lit these different scenes, I just used 2 simple compact lights. With the living room, we had just that little lamp in the background, but using that lamp as motivation, we used the CX100 as our key light. We left the reflector and diffusion on here, kind of shooting down to kind of fill in that side of my face and work as kind of our fill light. And then we use the X60. This light I just bounced off the wall behind me at 100%. That wall is a good 15 feet away from me, and it still bounced that blue color all the way over to the side of my face. These are what I have been wanting for a long time, especially when it comes to traveling, doing interviews, or any kind of smaller projects. I don't want to have to check a bag full of lighting gear, and I don't really always want to have to rent a full package of lighting gear wherever I go, or have the budget. These come with reflectors. You can buy softboxes that mount on these, or you can get a Bowens adapter, which is what I have done, and then mount existing softboxes you have. But this is a 100 watt, this is a CX100, and then the X60 is a 60 watt RGB bicolor. Now personally, I was quite surprised at the differences between these 2 lenses. It really is not noticeable, and you can see there is a slight difference in the tint of the images. One tends to be a little bit more magenta versus the other, or a little bit more green, but it's honestly not hugely noticeable, and it's something that you can easily fix in post. Now I am shooting this in 6K open gate on the Fuji X-H2S. I'm shooting it in open gate so that you can see the actual full image. I'm also using a speed booster, so this is the equivalent of the 58mm. It's not a cropped in version of like a 90mm. You're welcome. Second setup, something similar, just in the bedroom. Just a simple 2-light setup. You can see again, very little noticeable difference between these two. With the bedroom scene, I did something very similar. However, I did put a softbox on the CX100 and kind of use it as my key light again. I just boomed the X60 behind me and kind of had it popping in to kind of give a little bit of rim light and backlight. Since it's nighttime, almost that moonlight feel. I did decide just randomly to change the lighting setup for this tight shot just because I wanted to. Honestly, these lenses are basically interchangeable. They might have slight differences, of course, depending on the year and model, maybe a slight change in the tint, whether it be magenta or green, again, based on the coating, but nothing really drastic except for maybe flaring, which is going to depend on whether it's a single or multi-coated lens. This one specifically single-coated, it's got the T on there. I believe they added an asterisk when it was multi-coated. So why might you pick one of these versions over the other? Now, the Helios has been talked about forever. Every year there's 5-10 videos that come out and people watch them all about the Helios 44 because again, it's just constantly used in newer films and it just gives a great unique characteristic and look. Again, Batman most recently, and then Dune with the MK2 series. If you're unfamiliar with the MK2 series, it is a rehoused cine lineup of lenses, staple lens of that series, you could say, being the Helios 44 too. The rest of the lenses in that series are substituted with things like the Jupiter lineup of lenses, the Carl Zeiss Jena lineup. There is a complete series of this, which is why maybe you would lean towards that. You can also get a rehoused Jena lineup, but most people are simply cine modding these kits, which is a much better budget option. These tend to be a bit more reliable than the Helios and Jupiter lenses, which again just goes back to the quality standards, but that isn't to say you can't get a reliable kit with the Jupiter and Helios lineup. Also, the Jena lineup primarily focuses around the Pancolar 55mm 1.4 and not so much the Biotar. And there's just enough sharpness to these lenses to give you that good balance to use in a lot of different scenarios and projects. If you get on eBay for finding PL versions of these, which are easily mounted to a lot of different cameras, as well as EF versions as well, and they're relatively inexpensive. Now, when you compare it to the Helios 44, though, between the Biotar 58, the Helios comes out cheaper. Why? Because it was just produced in such a mass scale for so long in the Soviet Union. And again, once you got to those lower quality standards, they just started cranking them out. And of course, so it was cheaper and easier to produce these. You can get these for still around $50, whereas the Biotars, I believe, go for double that, if not a little bit more. Is there a huge difference between these lenses? I would say not really. Again, depending on your version, it may difference. The Helios tends to give you a little bit more contrast, a little bit more saturation in your colors, whereas the Biotar tends to be a little bit flatter and a little bit more subdued, I guess you could say. Also, I think the Helios tends to have a little bit more of that bokeh swirl, so it's a much more pronounced characteristic. One of the big things that makes that difference in bokeh is the Biotar has 12 aperture blades, whereas the Helios 44 I have here only has 8. So of course it's going to change how that bokeh is portrayed and how it comes across on your images. Now back to these lights for a minute. These are from Zhiyun. I love these lights and where they're going with this, compact, powerful kind of setup. These aren't going to replace any massive studio lighting setups or something you'd use on big budget projects, and they aren't meant to compete with those. These are very useful when you need to scale down and need a smaller footprint, a little more flexibility to fit into a smaller space and move more quickly. They can be used in a pinch if you need something light and versatile for interviews. Obviously, having a bigger light source further away is ideal, but if you needed to, you could put this in a softbox and use it for an interview. Now, these lights were sent to me, but I'm not being paid for my opinion. They don't get to review this video, and to be completely honest, I was looking at buying these before they reached out to me anyways. I can stick both of these in my backpack or my Pelican with my camera setup and be good to go. I had to go to North Carolina to do a project. I had to check a whole suitcase in, and that was miserable, and I hated it. App controlled, controls on the back, removable battery. Battery lasts you about 15 minutes. You can power it with it, or you can run power straight to the fixture and just have an even more compact setup. If you take off your dome here, I mean, come on, does it get any more compact than that? Not much bigger than the lens here. If we want to be realistic. My whole system could be switching over to Zhiyun here pretty soon with their new lineup as well. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Biotar 58 versus the Helios 58. There are other lenses where you can get kind of similar looks as far as the bokeh and results. So if you know of any particular that you're using, be sure to leave that in the comments below. If there are any other lenses specifically you want to see me compare, I'm going to be doing some Canon, some Nikon, some Minolta, Pentax, but I wanted to start out with something that everybody knows and compare it to something that not quite as many people know about. And so that is all I have for this video.